Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel conversation on representation in Hollywood. My name is Monica Ramirez and I am one of the co-founders of the Latinx House. We are so happy that you've joined us for this conversation. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot that's already been said and a lot that's already been written, but we're going to get some new takes on this conversation. So, as was said earlier, for those of you who are here, this year, based on our count, there are 24 films at this festival which have Latinx themes or connections. And we feel like that is wonderful news to hear, and we celebrate all the filmmakers who are. We also want to see more, and I'm sure you do too. So for this conversation about representation, I'm so honored to have this panel here with me so that they can shed some light from where they sit about what some of the things are that need to change. So with me, I have Michèle Stephenson, who is a filmmaker, artist, and author who pulls from her Haitian and Panamanian roots to think radically about storytelling and to disrupt the imaginary and nonfiction spaces. They're very excited back there. We also have with us Pat Ratulangi, who is the Vice President of Global Communications for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Nielsen. She oversees Nielsen's internal and external communications focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we have our friend Estuardo Rodriguez, who is the principal and co-founder at the Raven Group, focused on government affairs. He also currently serves as president and CEO of Friends of the National Museum of the American Latino. For those of you who may not know this, it's a campaign that has existed for well over a decade, and there have been a lot of people who've been fighting really hard to see this museum be built on the National Mall, and he's doing the work day to day. Thank you. Thank you all. So, we also want to give special thanks to Friends and to Nielsen for helping to host this conversation. All right, let's get right into it. So, Pat has some new data that she's released. And I think it's really important for the crowd to hear a little bit about some of your new findings and to understand really what they tell us about representation in Hollywood. You know, are things getting better? What are your findings?
Thanks so much, Monica, for the opportunity to be here and be part of this conversation. And you'll find some of these postcards that summarize some of the findings that we've come up with as part of our Scene on Screen report about Latinx representation on screen. The good news is it hasn't changed much, but it hasn't gone down. However, the thing is that, like what you were saying, we need more, right? Latinos make up 19% of the US population, but across the board, representation only stands at 7%. And that is something that we need to do more of, and with all of us here as part of this fantastic festival, I know there'll be more and more and more. The other thing that we looked at as part of this report is not only just the numbers of who's there, but what and how are Latinos being shown on screen. So we looked at genre representation. The top genres, probably no surprise to you, right? Soaps, sports, and comedy. But what about things like dramas, some of the other reality shows, competitions, news, some of those other genres that really tell the breadth of our whole human experience that, Latinos have been a big part of the narrative within this country. Those are still pretty low down. There's also thematic representation that we looked at. What are the themes that are seen when Latinos are present? And some of those things, as you can see in the postcard here, the top themes are tyranny, faith, dignity, right, which are, I think, not surprising. But one of two interesting ones have come up. Artistic integrity, right, and kindness. Those are kind of like, wow, we've never seen this emerge before, but are starting to emerge within the content that are being seen across the US. So, there's another aspect of this as well. We were able to take a deeper dive at the Latina narrative. And that is somewhere, that's something that is super dear to us. I think many of you may know Stacey Dowdabus, who's my colleague, and is really the expert on this, right? she always reminds me that Latina Equal Pay Day is the last one that happens in the calendar year in the US,
Yes.
right? There's so much that needs to be done to showcase Latinas and the economic opportunity that lie in store for us. But when you look at the themes that are seen when Latinas are on screen, they're all, melodramatic and passionate and suspenseful. And if you're not being seen in other areas that are breaking tropes, debunking stereotypes, how can people think of Latinas in those other lights? So we need to have more roles where Latinas are seen as mothers, friends, CEOs, which we know you are. Look at all of you. So that's a summary of it.
I appreciate that overview of your findings, and I feel like sometimes people kind of talk about data, but we never really talk about the data and what it means in terms of real people's lives. And you kind of touched on that a bit in raising Latino Equal Pay Day, but what are some of the other, based on your findings, what have you been able to derive in terms of the real life impact of the numbers that you're seeing from the report that you wrote?
So first and foremost, the numbers show where there is a need for more, right? And it also tells our industry that there is an opportunity for greater representation of talent and narratives, right? And if there are more roles being written for Latinos, about Latinos and Latinas, there will be more opportunities for those behind the scenes, producers, directors, actors, actresses, right? And others. So that is something that we really need to dig into a little more. The other aspect of this is, of course, we always get the question, so what does it take to get seen? And ultimately, investment, right? And at Nielsen, we try to bring together what we know about audiences, what we know about content representation, to help showcase the return on investment, right?
Yeah.
If people have the funds and they want to invest, what are they getting out of it? So most recently, we just did a mini case study about some of the shows and particularly around Hispanic representation and what are we getting out of it. There's a score called bingeability. How many of you here are bingers? Yeah. See, there's so many of us who are here and we know that those eyeballs are staying on programs incessantly, right? And this is important for many of the streamers, the broadcast producers and so forth. 42% of the top shows that were on TV in 2022 had some form of Hispanic representation, both in front of the camera and in the top 3 roles, writers, producers, and showrunners, behind the scenes. So that tells us also that we need more talent, that is the strongest talent pipeline across the board, to make sure that when the opportunity arises, there's people to fill them and there's people to take them up.
Thank you. I also wanted to just name really quickly before I move on to Michèle, you're hearing some noise maybe behind, and I want to speak to what that is. You might be wondering. So the Latinx House is the official host of the NIKKI for the festival. So you've probably seen people kind of coming back here and going over there. There's the portrait studio behind where I'm seated, and there's a recording studio back in their corner. So that's what some of that noise you're hearing is about. So I just wanted to name that so that you knew it was happening. There's not a secret party happening back there that we weren't invited to. So Michèle, I want to talk about, first of all, thank you, and I want to talk about your work in the sense that you have really focused on the depth of the human experience and ensuring that, the complexity of our lives are really brought forth. And, and taking on some of the difficult conversations, there are really important conversations that need to be had around colonialism, around genocide, and around some of these things that sometimes people don't want to touch because they're hard. And you have made it your business of doing what is hard because those are truths that need to be told. And could you just share, so first of all, why have you made that very important choice? And how do you think other people can do similar work?
Sure. A couple of things I can talk a little bit about my body of work. There is one thing I want to do just to respond to something that was said before in terms of the idea, the notion that we, need to make sure that the talent is there. I would like to flip that a little bit also, and that we need to make sure that the gatekeepers are there. That the gatekeepers are there who are making the decisions, because I think there is a lot of talent out there. But who's making the green lights, who's green lighting stuff to allow the stories to sort of come to the surface. And part of it is how do we pressure for that, for the talent that already exists too. And so Well, you know, we talked a little bit before earlier. I also come from a human rights lawyer background, just like you, Monica. And so that has also informed the stories that I tell. And for me, leaving the law was really about realizing the narrative is crucial to any kind of systemic change. The law will only get us so far. It's the narratives that will help us create change. And so it's been the commitment for me. And also, it also enriches me sort of from a personal level as well as an artist. And so my most recent film was called Stateless, and it was looking at the denationalizations of Dominicans of Haitian descent in the DR, and some of the work that the diaspora was doing. And so that film premiered at Tribeca Film Festival and was on PBS, was on POV. So for me, I'm not in it for the money, and it's to really try to change the narratives of how we see ourselves. And it's a long game, it's a marathon. And it's really about the passion that you have, and you look for the funding and you don't quit your day job. You kind of balance it all out, but knowing that the passion also pushes it as well. And currently I have a film that is in the US documentary competition called Going to Mars. And it's the NIKKI GIOVANNI project. And it's about the poet NIKKI GIOVANNI, and who she makes the parallel between the transatlantic slave trade and Middle Passage that has impacted all of the Americas, and the flight, the trip to Mars. So yeah.
Thank you. So you kind of answered it, but you didn't answer it totally, and I want to go back to it because I think it's really important. You've made a very difficult choice to focus on what you're focusing on. These are the stories that people don't want to tell because they're difficult, right? That can't be easy to make that choice as a filmmaker. And I just want to, first of all, give you flowers for that, for making that choice.
Yeah.
But also just for folks who are in the room, what does it take to make those choices? And how do you move people to support you in making that decision?
Well, it's about community. I think it's really about building a community that believes in your vision, but that you also kind of build together and that you trust. And I just want to push back a little bit against, my films have been seen. American Promise which was a film that was a 13-year longitudinal documentary, had millions and millions of viewers, and kind of had an award for the largest social impact film. And public television has been my main sort of source of change. That has a huge viewing. But in terms of the determination, I guess you're talking about, there is also, for me, an investment in the craft. So yes, these are difficult stories, some of them, but I really am committed to telling it in a way that audiences can relate, right? It's not, I'm sort of anti, not social issue doc, but anti sort of PSA driven, I'm gonna hit you on the head what the message should be. I'm more about the complexity of our lived existence and telling it in a way with the conventions of storytelling that everyone can relate to. So it's about sharing our common humanity, but also knowing that mainstream sort of push for audiences, that I have to also do the work to get that audience. I know the audience is there, but I cannot also just rely on the mainstream mechanisms to get to the people that I know it will relate to. So it's kind of like this full sort of force. And yes, it's difficult, but it's a long-term thing. I've been at this for a few decades, and I'm mentoring also a lot of sort of younger filmmakers who have the commitment. But it's really important to keep storytelling at the center, and not to want to dictate to people what they should be thinking.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for clarifying. I definitely 100% did not mean that there were millions of people watching your films, but just that sometimes people don't want to support the hard stories, right? Because they're hard. So
that's right.
Thank you for the clarification as well. And all right, Estuardo, this is also another thing. I don't know if you guys realize I take on the hard things. That's kind of where I stay. Spend my time on the hard things. But the hard things are so important. And you've been doing something so hard for so long, which is pushing to ensure that our community is represented on the National Mall, ensuring that we have a museum that tells our story. Talk about sort of how that journey started, and really, what do we all here need to do to help make that happen as it relates to this larger conversation on representation?
Well, number one, thanks again for reaching out and giving me the opportunity to be here. Just to kind of tie this all together from the start, the idea of storytelling, making films, writing books, you name it, social media, whatever, it's born from something, a personal experience. I think Steven Spielberg just received an award for a movie that was focused on his childhood, right? And that to me was just a reminder of why we're pushing for this museum, because it is from your childhood experience in your classroom, on your field trips, that you begin to understand your surroundings and your community. And for me, 19 years ago when I started on this endeavor, it really was just about a museum. And as I was educated by our community through the years, whether it was the Puerto Rican community, the Cuban American experience, the Chicano experience, I could go on because our community is very diverse. And that's a whole other experience that needs to be highlighted in this museum. But as I went through that whole roadshow, it became clear to me that it wasn't even about the museum itself as much as it is making sure that we're using the museum as a tool to feed a more accurate narrative of U.S. history throughout every sector of our society. So the field trip that goes to the African American Museum, that plants a seed in so many children and teachers who then go back and say, I didn't know about this. Maybe what we could do is take something we saw in that museum and create a whole essay project for kids. And even the adults that go to that museum walk away with something else. Imagine how many creatives go through that museum and say, there's so many movies or short stories that I could pull from this museum. And that's what it is, really, to create a National Museum of the American Latino. And the Women's History Museum, which also passed at the same time in 2020, those will serve as a mechanism to really plant seeds everywhere to grow the greater diverse narrative that we need in Hollywood, whether it's New York, wherever that media platform is. So, I mean, I would love to say, I started this whole thing 19 years ago because I just knew exactly what this was going to be and I was impassioned and I was going to do it. No, I kind of fell into it thinking, what a great project. And then 19 years later, I'm like, oh my God, I've learned so much, and the challenge is real because we thought we'd be done with the passage of the bill in 2020. And the reality is now we're fighting to make sure that they build this museum and the Women's History Museum shoulder to shoulder with all the other iconic museums that tell our nation's story. Because you cannot create these museums and then say, okay, well, those two museums go down the street where no one really goes. Because 24 million people go to the National Mall. They don't go down to Cassia, where there are annex museums. They don't go down the street up past the Capitol building. They go to the National Mall, and building after building help fill the void that our American history classes currently have. There's a lot more to do, unfortunately, but we have a very strong community around the country, and now we have many of you, not just here, but those that are watching the live stream. We need people to make noise about this, because if we don't, we are going to risk being relegated to some off-site location and still face the same problem of not feeling like we truly are part of the American fabric, which is 100% incorrect, right? We have fed this story from the beginning and even before.
Yes, and Estuardo, I think it's helpful for folks who aren't sort of in the day-to-day as you are, like, why 19 years? Like, what have been the roadblocks? Like, what is the holdup? Like, what needs to change so that this can actually get done?
You saw how long it took to get McCarthy elected to be majority, yeah? That was amazing. If you're a policy wonk and you didn't stay up till 2 in the morning like me to watch that vote, C-SPAN should get an Emmy for that. They had so many cameras everywhere. It was like Chisme Central watching until 2 in the morning. Chisme Central, I'm telling you, it's the truth. But anyway, so it's 19 years because you need the political will, you need the timing. People want to get a win, and by people I mean members of the House and the Senate. They want to win. They want to be able to say, we did this, I did this. I can't tell you how many members, and look, this is a bipartisan thing. It has always been bipartisan because we frame it as American history, patriotism, servicemen and women who have defended this country for hundreds of years. That's what this is about, which is how we've been able to build that bipartisan coalition. But I can't tell you how many members in the House and the Senate at the 11th hour when the bill was going to pass, jumped on last minute, like, oh yeah, count me in. Right before we were able to get it over. And we took it. I'm like, great, that's fine. Right? They can take their win. Because in the end, I knew that we still needed that same support to get the location on the national law. If you don't have the timing, the political will, the pressure, the noise from our community, it just takes that long. And I will say 19 years wasn't that bad because the African American Museum took 80 to 90 years. Okay, there are people that never saw that museum open that fought for that museum. And when I met one of the original advocates of the second iteration of that campaign, I told him I appreciate the history lesson, but I promise you we're going to do everything we can to beat that time and not go 80 years. So we're now at, if you count from when Raul Izaguirre and Unidos US, formerly NCLR, started this whole report with the Smithsonian back in 1994, we're at 27 years. I picked up the baton 10 years after they issued their report called Willful Neglect, laying out that the Smithsonian had intentionally omitted diverse stories from all their exhibits, including Latino stories.
Thank you for that context. Okay, so everyone here, all of us here, we believe that change is possible and that change is happening, and we're all committed to seeing that change through. I'd love to hear from each of you, what is your call to action? And I'd love to hear, Michèle, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about what you're working on now and how we can best help you now. But what's your call to action? What do we need to do to go from conversation to change? You start. Okay, you start tapping that, but I had an addition from Michèle.
So for us, as a company, right, we are committed to doing as much as we can with straight up data. But we're like you. Data is not just for data's sake, it's for driving that action forward. And just looking at the representation is one aspect of that. But we're also seeing how there's been an increase, and this is what gives us all hope, right? This has been a tremendous increase in influence of the Hispanic community within Hollywood. Look at, and not for Hispanic audiences itself, but across all of media. Look at all the award winners recently. Nominations for Jenny Ortega, who is playing Wednesday. That's not a Latino story, right? Giancarlo Esposito for People's Choice. Selena Gomez, Murders in the Building. I mean, that was also one of the top shows for everyone, not just Latinos and Latinas. So that, to me, is, let's use the measurements, let's use the returns on investment, let's use the data, the hard data, and turn that around to the people who are challenging you, the decision makers who are not turning those lights green, and show them, guess what? We have history, we have the stories that prove that media has the power to change perceptions and break stereotypes, and you have a lot to win when you seize upon that action.
Thank you. And so, Michèle, we need to support your movie, which we're going to celebrate again. Let's all give another round of applause. When you watch it, you go for it. Tell us what you're working at right now, and what is your call to action?
Okay. I think I'll start with my call to action. I think that for me, what I try to do certainly on a daily basis, and what I challenge people to do, is to not perpetuate what we've internalized. So we need to understand the complexity of what we have called Latinx identity. And when we're knocking on those doors, how diverse is that representation? What is our accountability around understanding all of the marginalized groups that have historically not had the voice within our communities. And so how do we not perpetuate that when we're pushing those doors? We have a lot of work to do, both internally within our communities as well. I'm currently, well, these are at very early stage projects because this other has consumed quite a bit, and I'm finishing a couple of other projects that are fully funded at our commission. But in terms of future, I'm directing and producing a series on the Afropunk Festival. I don't know if people know about Afropunk Festival. That happens in Brooklyn, Atlanta, Paris, Johannesburg, also in Brazil, in Bahia, and there's going to be an iteration in Cali, Colombia, as well. So we're doing a 8-part episodic series, sort of following the musical tradition and the counterculture that comes out of this festival, where there's a huge following. And I have a more personal one that is really looking at my Panamanian grandmother and the intergenerational trauma from mother to child to grandchild, but also it's about migration, color, class within the Caribbean. My grandmother hopped around a lot, from Panama to Colombia to Cuba, Dominican Republic, and also ended up in Haiti. So I want to sort of track that and figuring out whether it's going to be either a hybrid or full narrative fiction film.
All right, Estuardo, what are the marching orders? What do all of us here need to be doing to help make sure this museum happens on the National Mall?
Thank you. I got two things for that. One is very easy. Go to AmericanLatinoMuseum.org. Go to Latino Museum on social media. Follow us. Get involved. Find out who your congress member is. Find out who your senator is. Get involved in that kind of outreach. The other piece is a little more complicated because it really speaks to who we are and how we see ourselves. For example, she said Colombian, and a couple of Colombians popped up real quick over here, right? Now that's amazing because we're all used to that happening. There was a Peruvian director up here earlier. I was in back going Peru, right? Because that's my background. But here's the piece that I always find interesting, and I've done this at some large gatherings. I've had people, in the room, and I'm like, ¿Cuánto colombiano? ¿Cuánto boricua? ¿Cuántos Nicaraguenses, right? And everyone does the thing that we always do. But then if you yell, ¿Cuántos americanos? People kind of pause. Because you're like, do I own that? Yes, you do. You have to own that. Because that's what you've been doing your entire time here, whether it was your parents who came here, or you came here as a child, you've been giving and sweating and bleeding. You're American. You own this, you deserve this. And so the second challenge for me is own it. Tell your story. Tell your American story. Don't let them own what it means to be an American. Because when they own that, then they exclude you from the National Mall. So, ¿Cuántos colombianos americanos? I'm going to let you guys, the Colombians, go right now. If I said Argentina, we'd be here all night. Anyway, all right. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Estuardo. Thank you, Michèle. Thank you, Pat. Please pick up the materials that are in the room so that you can support the organization, support the work that's being done, share the data. We already said it once, but I'm going to say it again. You need to watch Michèle's movie. You need to vote for it. You need to watch all of them, all of the content, and talk about it. Talk to your friends and your family about all that you've learned today, but also from her great films, from all the projects. We have to watch them, we have to consume them, but we have to talk about them too. So with that, please share out what you've learned today. What did you like about this conversation? And keep the conversation going. Thank you all.